We are going to get our meeting started on tonight. Thank you all for being here for the special public forum tonight to hear from the community around the NDO. So we'll kick off the meeting tonight and we will do roll call so that the audience knows who is here from the advisory board, and then we will do some opening remarks, put up a few ground rules, and then we will start our public conversation. So we will start with you, Mr. Gates.
I'm Shala Perez, appointed by Councilwoman Tuttle. And I would just like to note, Tabitha just texted and said she's stuck at the train, but she'll be here.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm Mackenzie Borland. I was appointed by Mayor Brandon Whipple, and I might be heading out a little late. I'm a full-time student, and I have a couple papers due at midnight, so if I slip out, it's not because I'm bored. I just wanted to make that a note that I am a full-time student, so I might be slipping out because I do have some homework due.
Yes, we want you to graduate and stay here in Wichita, so yes. We'll come back to you, Tabitha.
Hi, Renee Carrion. I was appointed by Councilwoman District 6, Cindy Claycomb.
Thank you. You might have to push one of them buttons on.
There we go. Tabitha Lehman, and I was appointed by Jeff Blubaugh.
Thank you. Kelly? Kelly, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kelly Grant. I am appointed by Vice Mayor Brandon Johnson, and I'm looking forward to hearing the comments tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Jennifer Brehan, appointed by Mayor Brandon Whipple, and I'm anxious to hear whether or not we have a few more protected groups under the NDO tonight, as opposed to hearing the same thing over and over again. So I hope this is a good meeting tonight. I'm sitting in my car at the emergency room with my mother. I'm outside, but I'm in the meeting, I'm present.
Well, thank you for being here, and we know that if you drop off the call, you are taking care of family, and we will definitely keep your mom in prayers as they work through whatever is happening in her body. So I want to start off tonight just recognizing that the advisory board has requested that we host a public forum tonight to allow for residents to provide input and perspective on the non-discrimination order. The advisory board will not take any action on this evening. This is purely a public forum so that the board has an opportunity to hear all voices as they work to prepare a recommendation. The advisory board will meet on September the 21st here at City Hall at 5:30, where they will have a robust conversation about recommendations that they would like to move forward to the mayor and city council for consideration at the October 12th meeting. Please note that at the September 21st meeting, that meeting will not have public comment. This meeting was held to allow for the public to share their opinion and perspectives and to give the board September 21st to have a conversation amongst themselves to develop their recommendation. To ensure that we have a great conversation on tonight and that all voices are heard, I would ask the audience to take a look at the ground rules that we have established for tonight's meeting. And I will move this out of the way. I think I will. There we go. It's important that we hold true to the ground rules that we have established tonight so that we can ensure that the board has an opportunity to hear the different perspectives as well as ask any clarifying questions so that they walk away with full understanding of your voices and perspectives as it relates to the NDO. Most importantly, we want to thank you for exercising your civic duty and your civic engagement rights to be a part of this conversation. We hope that you will feel heard when you leave on tonight, recognizing that we are not taking action and we are not trying to build consensus. I would like to continue to share, let's be respectful and mindful of the voices that come forth on this evening. Are there any questions of the advisory board before we turn it over to the public for the open forum? Seeing none, Adam will call up the speakers one at a time. We will start with the individuals that signed up online first, and then transition to speakers who signed up when they arrived on this evening.
Jennifer Pearson.
Hello, I can't believe I'm first. I'm really nervous because I've not done this in person before, so thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to take my mask off if that's okay so you can hear me a little better. My name is Dr. Jenny Pearson, and I'm a professor of sociology at Wichita State. I live in Wichita with my 13-year-old daughter who attends a middle school in USD 259, and I'd rather not give my address, but I do live in District 6. My research focuses on youth well-being and social context, with an emphasis on the well-being and success of LGBTQ youth. Although there are many reasons I urge you to support an inclusive non-discrimination ordinance, I want to speak primarily about what the research on youth well-being tells us about the importance of this NDO. Content warning, I'm going to talk about suicide. Many of my friends and others from our community have spoken at several of these meetings about this ordinance's suicide prevention, and the data does in fact back this up. You likely know that LGBTQ youth are much more likely than their straight cisgender peers to consider, attempt, and complete suicide. Nationally representative data shows us that this risk is three times higher for LGBTQ youth and higher still for trans youth. You may also know that bullying, harassment, and hostile environments contribute to these high rates of suicide. Research is clear that this suicide risk is not inherent to being queer or trans. It stems directly from the level of stigma and discrimination in the social environment. My research focuses on these experiences among youth, but similar trends are seen among adults. And while suicide is an extreme outcome of distress, the same patterns hold for other aspects of mental health, physical health, and educational success. Structural stigma is a term used to describe how the social conditions can impact the opportunities and well-being of LGBTQ individuals. It's an idea similar to cultural and structural racism that focuses on the larger social environment rather than individual beliefs and behaviors. Policies are central to that environment. Structural stigma works at multiple levels, from the school to the larger community and even to the state. For example, youth who attend schools with protective policies and programs have better outcomes and lower suicide risk. At the state level, research has found that changes in state laws about same-sex marriage were associated with decreased suicide rates among youth. And state-level protections against employment discrimination and hate crimes lead to better mental health outcomes among adults. My own research shows that LGBTQ youth are less likely to be bullied and are less likely to consider or attempt suicide in states with policy support for LGBTQ equality and non-discrimination laws. I'm happy to share any of this research if you have questions. This NDO would not only protect those who have directly experienced unfair treatment in housing and employment, and I personally have heard many stories from friends and colleagues of that happening. This ordinance sends a message to all of our youth that they're valued and protected. It's indeed suicide prevention. Thank you.
Kendall Hawkins.
Dr. Pearson, would you be willing to send that, your research on to the board, please? Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Pearson, if you could also include the citations, I would appreciate that, just a reference list if possible.
Hello, my name is Kendall Hawkins. I am the policy coordinator for Glisson, Kansas, and I worked with many of you in the workshop here recently on this non-discrimination ordinance. So I wanted to point out a couple of pieces of information that show a need for this ordinance in Kansas. A 2019 UCLA School of Law Williams Institute survey of LGBTQ people in Kansas reported that 38% of trans people experience workplace harassment, 29% reported being fired, and 22% experienced housing discrimination within the past year because of discriminatory practices. So these are firm statistics that show that this is something that LGBTQ people are experiencing here in our state, and most definitely within our city. And one of the big sticking points for a lot of people has been the issue of restrooms. That seems to come up all the time. However, a 2017 report by the Police Foundation, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit foundation, found that after reviewing complaints of sexual assault in Atlanta, Dallas, Miami Beach, Miami Gardens, and Tucson, before and after official amendment of their human rights ordinances in those localities, so NDOs much like ours, they did not find evidence of sexual assaults taking place in which men, under the guise of being women or transgender, entered women's bathrooms in a commitment to sexually assault or otherwise victimize women. They further found that most people that were sexually assaulted in such instances were actually not assaulted by a stranger, but by somebody that they knew. So that is, again, another firm piece of evidence. The concerns that we hear about restrooms and all those things, set aside for a moment, that's a whole nother city ordinance that they're talking about, but those concerns of theirs are not grounded in confirmable data. This is. So when something is not grounded in confirmable data, it is based on a fear. And when a judgment is based on a fear, that is a prejudice. It is not something that should be driving our policy. It has also been reported widely that we have a problem with brain drain here in Kansas. And one of the issues that people are, or that young people are leaving Kansas because of, is because of LGBTQ plus discrimination. And they are seeking out places that do have protections in the non-discrimination ordinances. And other companies, they look at these policies to determine if they're going to bring jobs to those cities. And KSN News reported here recently that tech companies are currently looking at Wichita as a destination for them to bring some more jobs to our city. So passing a non-discrimination ordinance like this would send a strong message to those companies that their employees are welcome here, that their families are welcome here, and that they will be supported and taken care of, and that there's a place for them here. Furthermore, non-discrimination ordinances such as this, they set a tone for people, for the city to follow. And having one of these ordinances in place sends a strong message as to what is acceptable within our city, how we treat each other, and what is not. Thank you.
Stephanie Byers.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you once again. I know it seems like I've been here quite a bit. First of all, I want to thank you all for the fact that you did put time into allowing the KLC to foster some discussion. One of the things that's key takeaways from that discussion, as far as I was concerned, was the explicit explanation from the attorneys of the non-discrimination policies and laws we currently have, both in the state and the national level, what they do and do not cover, and the temporary nature of those, that they are based on decisions not codified into law, and why it is here in Wichita we do need these codified. As a member of the transgender community, it was frustrating to hear only one trans voice in that. But I think also you could tell during those discussions the importance of this, because it seems we have two sides. We have one side that is fighting to be able to have protections of their human rights. I am a trans person. That to me is immutable. I have always been a trans person. It wasn't a choice. It's always been there. And then we have the other side, which is fighting for religious freedoms, something that they claim that they have. Well, first of all, this is our city. It's not a church. When we're looking at religious freedoms, where do those begin and where do those end? We know that according to the Supreme Court in Pickey Park v. Newman, actually Newman v. Pickey Park, took place in the 1960s, just after the Civil Rights Act, that a man claimed it was his religious right to discriminate against people who were black. And the Supreme Court said, nope, that is not how that works. Your religious right does not go that far. Picky Park is a barbecue place. He refused to serve people who were a minority. And they said, that's not it, that's public accommodation. And they took it one more step and said, it is your responsibility to pay the court costs now as well. And so that is a very big decision in the civil rights movement. It took place in 1968 was the final decision on Newman v. Piggy Park. Another point of discussion was brought up that this ordinance can put someone who is perhaps not as well off economically in a position where they can't pay for mediation if it comes to that. We have here in Kansas the Kansas Legal Services, which is an organization that extends on a sliding scale mediation benefits and does work with the Kansas Human Rights Commission. I would assume that members of the city council or the mayor's office could reach out to the Kansas Legal Services organization and see if they would be willing to also work that with our NDO. I urge you that when you do speak with the city council, that you tell them that this NDO is good. We have areas that can be improved, but we're also finding ways to make those improvements, like working with Kansas Legal Services so that a sliding scale can be provided for those who may not be able to afford the cost of mediation and other things. Thank you.
Felicia?
Good evening. My name is Felicia Scribner, and I am the pastor of Woodland United Methodist Church in the North Riverside area of Wichita. And I come here today appreciating the research and appreciating the work folks have done into investigating the legal side of this. But I am here today to talk about the religious side as a pastor. I know the opposition to this NDO from our Christian community has been very loud. And what I would like for everyone to understand, particularly the members of this board, is that Christianity is not united in the opposition to the passage of this NDO. There are many people in the Christian community and other faith traditions that believe totally and completely, without reservation or caveat, that each person is made in the image of God, and that each person reflects that divine image. And so as we have experienced various religious folks get up and express fear and prejudice toward an already vulnerable demographic in our community, and using the name of the God that I worship to do that, I've been quite dismayed. It has broken my heart. And sometimes when you're in a position like mine, you're not sure exactly when to speak up or how to speak up. And as a person that really strives to be a good ally, those boundaries are sometimes hard to cross. But as folks have gotten up and spoken in the name of a religion that I claim as my own, and yet espousing beliefs that are totally contradictory to my own, I felt compelled to come and to say, we are not united in this. Every person has the right to read and interpret Scripture in the way they see fit. They do not have a right, then, to use that Scripture to abuse people and to discriminate against them. As was stated previously, there are limits to religious freedom. And for me, my hope for Wichita, for the church where I serve, for the neighborhood surrounding that church, is that this board and then later our city council would take a position that says all life deserves basic human protections. And it is also my hope that eventually our faith communities can come to the place where they look at every single person and they can say with confidence, that person is made in the image of God. Thank you.
Nancy Tanton?
thank you for the opportunity to address you. I appreciate that. I was able to be on that panel also and appreciated the opportunity to be there. And I did write an email, and I probably will do another just on my thoughts. But I wanted to share a concern with you tonight, kind of about the organization of all of this. And, you know, we talked at the panel and we shared different views and all of that, but we never once looked at the document. And I've come to 2 of your committee meetings, and I'm not saying that there was a way to do it, but you haven't looked at the document together. And so I'm wondering what we are going to propose to the council and how they're going to take it. Is anybody looking at the document and going over it like paragraph by paragraph and saying, okay, what is this saying right now? What do you think that they are meaning by this right now? Is this the best way to say it? Is this actually giving opportunity? There are times when, yes, I mean, I'm not on a side actually. I'm saying, are there ways that we can take this and we can protect this one at the same time protecting this one? Are there some things, because we have to give and take. You know, we can't say one side gets it all, no matter which side, and I'd rather say group, not side, which group gets it all. Can we come together and see, okay, this isn't exactly what this group is asking for, neither is it exactly what this group is asking for, but my really, really, really main concern is, when is anybody going to look at the document? Because I don't think at present, and I may be wrong, but I don't know that the city council is going to look at it. It sounds like they're going to take your recommendation and they're going to vote that day. So I'm really concerned about that, and just asking that there would be a way that this committee would say, hey, we need to be able to look at the document and go through it. And it's going to take more than an hour to do that. And so just kind of throwing that out there. What are we doing with this document? How are we doing? Right now, it is just a bunch of opinions. And I'm not saying opinions lightly. There's lots and lots of emotions involved in the opinions. There's lots of statistics involved in the opinion, depending on where you get the statistics. But what are we going to do with that document? And I just hate to see it passed just because of opinions, or not passed just because of opinions. And thank you very much.
Rebecca Walter.
Hi there, thank you so much. Again, I just wanted to talk about looking at the document as it's currently written. I'm not sure that I understand all the implications of the ordinance that's on there. I wonder if you know all the full implications of what this is really saying. Again, like, I want to know, what are you thinking of it? Because what you're thinking might not be what I'm thinking, and I don't know that we really know what this is. I really appreciate the chance to come up here and speak with you. But again, we haven't heard from you. I just don't know how this is being interpreted. I have a couple concerns, a couple questions. You know, as a woman, I have a 21-year-old. I also have a 19-year-old girl. And I tell them, be self-aware around you. If you're going somewhere, be aware of who's following you. Going into the bathroom, be aware of who's following you. Now we're saying, no, anyone can go. It's kind of an open policy for the restroom is what I'm seeing it as. I don't know if that's what you're seeing it as, but as long as anyone can perceive themselves as being, and I'm not even saying, I should have started off this way. I'm not saying LGBTQ has anything to do with this. It's anyone who would take advantage and say, you know, I can go in there because I want to, I can cause mischief, whatever, but now I'm supposed to tell my girls, Don't be self-aware of what's going on. Anyone can go in there. I'm not saying they're going to be raped, but there are mental distress. You know, I don't know how many people have a purse and they put that on the hook. Easy target now. So how are we gonna, you know, keep those safe? How are you gonna keep us safe? So right now I'm interpreting as anyone can go in there. Anyone can go into the restroom. And I just didn't know if there's any parameters that we're taking just to make sure that there is safety. How do we preserve everyone's rights? How do you give rights to the LGBTQ community? And how do you preserve ours just to make sure that we feel safe as well? Again, I'm not saying it's from LGBTQ. It's anyone who can take advantage of that. I was at Lowe's the other day. Someone had something, walked right out the door with it without paying. There are people who will take advantage of any opportunity that they have. Does this impact our schools, our high schools? Does it impact the bathrooms and the locker rooms where they shower? Does this go all the way down to elementary schools? I guess we just need to know what this means. I don't want to pass something just to pass it. You know, are we trying to be successful and pass this through, or are we trying to be significant and make a document that's good and that keeps everyone safe, both sides, both communities, I should say? Again, how are you going to preserve everyone's rights and not just put, you know, one over the other? We all want our way. We're all human. We want to have our way, and I know that we have to somehow give and take, but we need to make sure that we're doing that, we're giving and we're taking, and we're not just saying, no, you know, this is the way it is. So again, how are you going to preserve our rights? And that's something that, I mean, it's heavy on you guys. I'm sorry. It's a heavy thing for you guys to do. So I'm out of time. Thank you.
Javon Gonzalez.
Hello, I'm Javen Gonzalez, and I live in District 6. So I am here because this entire process has been insulting to the members of the public who've come to speak to the council. It's been insulting to this board, frankly, and delaying this vote has only, and outsourcing the mediation and the conversation has only served two purposes. Let's be frank. It served the purpose of allowing the council members to continue to play political games and to carve out protections for the LGBTQ community. That's it. That's the only reasons why this was delayed. Cindy Claycomb and Jared Cerullo have used this for pure political gain, signifying that their elected position is more important than my civil rights and the civil rights of every minority in this room. Just this weekend, Cindy Claycomb used this NDO in a political poll to test to see its popularity compared to Brandon Whipple, compared to her opponent, and compared to herself. Why? Doing the popular thing does not always mean doing the right thing. And we need somebody who's going to do the right thing. I hope you guys will do the right thing. The delay on this NDO has resulted in time being given to groups to allow to be chipped away at the protections. Just this past week, Becky Tuttle was touting adding and enforcing the ordinance against trans people using the restrooms. I mean, just adding these, delaying this is just adding more and more time for these people to chip away at the protections of people. We can't leave any members of the LGBTQ community behind. I hope that this ordinance is passed with full protections and that we take this opportunity to make it better. I would hope that you guys would recommend adding a conversion therapy ban to this ordinance and making the best out of this bad situation. As the speaker before me said, that we have to give and take, but we cannot compromise on civil rights. There's no room for compromising. That comes down to just one pure thing. You're either for discrimination or you're against discrimination. The council wants to continue to play political games, but I hope all of you are on the right side, and I hope that you guys are for or against discrimination. And as a side note, trans people will not steal your purse in the bathroom.
Deborah Edmondson.
Hello, thank you for your time this evening. I just wanted to give a personal testimony of something that I experienced. About 5 years ago, my family and I were on a road trip in the Carolinas. We had stopped at a mall to do some shopping, and I noticed in the main aisle kiosk a man dressed as a woman. I didn't think much of it until about 15 minutes later. I was entering into the women's restroom, and as I turned to close the stall door, I saw the aforementioned person walk in. I immediately felt uncomfortable and anxious to the extent that I left the restroom without using it. As I exited it, my kids could tell something had happened that had upset me. I waited in the area for the individual to leave and then went back in. I just wanted to give my personal experience, which ties directly to the issue at hand. This event resulted in me being very uncomfortable because I did not feel safe in a woman's bathroom, a place where there should never be a question of safety. I am petitioning this committee to help ensure that these types of occurrences do not become commonplace in the city of Wichita or surrounding areas. Please consider the overwhelming majority of people who desire to leave bathrooms designated by biological assignment and not by self-determined identity. I thank you for your service on the advisory board.
Rebecca Janik. June Scott.
Thank you for this opportunity to share some thoughts with you. I did take the time to listen and look at the 7th and 8th facilitation that went on, and I thought that the first evening where the two attorneys presented their the comparisons of the federal, state, and what this ordinance would do was excellent. I think it gave a good overview of what laws are already in place. It seemed to me that we do have a local office here at the Kansas level to file claims for discrimination, and that it does cover almost everything that the MDO ordinance is also wanting to put into place. They offer help in putting the claim together. There's litigation, there's mediation that they offer. So it seemed very similar to me, very redundant. So I'm just looking on this as maybe another layer that's not necessary, that there are regulations and laws out there to address these issues. I also felt that there was still a lot of confusion, especially after the second facilitation, as to where people could have consensus. There was confusion still on what some of these items were on the NDO, that what does that really mean? I guess one of the things that was the biggest thing that stood out to me as well was the wording and the definition of the gender identity and sexual orientation that says perceived, actual or perceived, by the individual or another. That's what the NDO is stating. That seems like a very broad definition, especially that gender identity, it seems to be very fluid. To me, that is opening up our courts to more of a feeling, rather than facts, and that laws based on feelings cannot be very. I think it opens up to a lot of confusion and interpretation on both sides. I mean, how do you know how someone perceives you unless you tell them how you want to be perceived, and then it's a non-issue. Then the perception has already been identified. So I think that was a term that was a kind of a hard thing for people to get around. There are other things in there, but my time's up. But do look at the ordinance and take a close look at what are those various areas and what is it really saying. So thank you for your time.
Ms. Scott, where's this place at that you were speaking of that has all of the components that are already in place?
Oh, that is the, let me write it here. It's the It's the Kansas, Kansas Human Rights Commission. It's at 300 West Douglas, Suite 220, where claims can be filed, and that's at the state level. So, anything else?
Thank you.
Jill Sander.
Good evening. My name is Reverend Jill Sander Chali. I'm the senior pastor at College Hill United Methodist Church, and I live in southeast Wichita. First, I want to share a bit of my own personal story. I am a white woman married to a black man. So I am part of an interracial family and an interracial marriage that would have been illegal many years ago. In addition, I vote. I am a woman who votes. I also work outside the home. I am a woman who works outside the home. In addition to that, I'm an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, so I'm a pastor. And I'm part of a pastor that's proudly been ordaining women for many years, but not always, right? Not always. And so I want to add my voice as a religious leader, but also as a woman who knows what it means to experience discrimination. Also as a person who is married, again, to a person of color, and hearing his experiences has opened my own eyes as well to things I couldn't see before. But because he's given me the privilege of that insight into his story, I'm able to see better things that he experiences that are discrimination. So in my church, I serve a community of faith that believes discrimination is incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And though I know the city of Wichita is not a church, and I wouldn't expect you to be a church, I do think it's important for you all to hear the voices of religious leaders and people within the Christian community who do advocate for full inclusion and who are in support of this non-discrimination ordinance, even from our faith perspective. At my church, we believe our church is stronger and better because of that call to include all of God's children. And I believe that that is also true for our community here in Wichita, that passing a non-discrimination ordinance will make our community stronger and safer. I believe it's important to listen to the voices of those who are currently being most adversely impacted about how we might better ensure their safety, better ensure opportunities for employment, healthcare, housing, fill in the blank, to ensure a community where all can thrive. And so I stand before you as one who stands on the shoulders of others before me, who advocated for me and my right to be a human being and live my life to the fullest. And so I would encourage you to voice support for the non-discrimination ordinance and to move it forward to passage. Thank you.
Jennifer Nielsen.
Thank you. This will be brief. I have read this so many times, this ordinance 51-600, and I just find it very confusing. And I have even got all kinds of things highlighted in here that I don't understand. I've asked friends, a couple of friends, to look at this and try to explain to me, and they have a hard time too. Our municipal courts are, I think, overworked. We have state and federal laws that give protections to all facets of our community that I just think this is unnecessary. I think it's cumbersome. I think it's unnecessary. Wichita is a great community. We have a lot of great people here. And I think all people have protections. So I just appeal to you as a taxpayer, please don't put in a whole nother layer that is just going to cost us money when we already have the protections built in at the state and federal levels. Thank you so much for your service.
Scott Litweiler.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Reverend Scott Litweiler. I'm a pastor at Lorraine Avenue Mennonite Church in the Sunnyside area. One of the things that I really like about my church is that they hired me as an openly queer young person to be their pastor, and so I am here to advocate to you all to urge that you do pass this ordinance. I think it's really important. For me, as a young person, I grew up in a conservative area, and scripture was hurled at me to hurt me in so many ways. It was used to make me feel less than because I am a queer person. And so going through seminary, one thing I had to learn how to do was to reclaim scripture. And one of my professors graciously offered me the quote that if scripture is not liberative, then it is not scripture. And an example of this is that when Mary, the mother of Jesus, found out she was pregnant, she sang a song that we call the Magnificat and says that God has saw a favor on me, and God, through this act, is going to bring liberation to the oppressed, to feed the hungry, to let those who are imprisoned go free. And Jesus, when he is setting the intent for his ministry in Luke 4, says almost exactly the same thing. He quotes the prophet Isaiah and says that I have been called to bring freedom from oppression, to give good things to those who are poor, and to, again, I will just say, bring freedom from oppression. This is something that this ordinance is a part of. We are looking to bring freedom from oppression. And I believe in the separation of church and state, so I will also just say, as a voter, as a citizen, I urge you to pass this ordinance. And as an able-bodied person, I want to say that I am one accident away from being disabled, as are all of us here, and this ordinance protects those who are not able-bodied as well. This is more than gender identity, it is more than sexuality, we talk about the difference between facts and opinions. If you look up the statistics, trans individuals are far more likely to be harassed and assaulted in bathrooms than they are to harass and assault people. We in the queer community are being demonized simply for who we are, for who God has created us to be, for who our biology creates us to be as well. And this ordinance offers us the same protections that everyone else who is cisgender, who is able-bodied, who is straight has. The right to housing, to medical care, to worship freely, to be ourselves in our communities. And so I, as a clergy person and as a citizen, I urge you to recommend that this ordinance be passed. Thank you very much.
Gary Dimitrovich.
Evening. Thank you very much for allowing me to talk. I have a somewhat different opinion. I didn't plan on talking. I scribbled a bunch of stuff in the last 15 minutes, and it'll sound like it when I say it, too. I scribbled it down. I'm against laws of this kind in general, and not for religious reasons. I don't believe in a religious exemption to freedom. I don't believe in a religious exemption to governmental coercion of people making private decisions about their private lives, not about whether they're robbing people or attacking people, but in their own association and their own contracts. But of course, for 50 or 60 years, we've spit on it. We've had the so-called civil rights laws, and who dares disagree with those? We're all against discrimination, right? Discrimination is a fancy word for choice. And some people in some political spectrums, they like the word choice for certain purposes, others not so much. Now, I'm against this law because this law is not authoritarian, it's totalitarian. If I had a chalkboard, I'd draw a circle and say, an authoritarian regime will let you be as long as you stay in that circle and you don't tick off El Jefe. But a totalitarian regime isn't satisfied with that. And this is a totalitarian proposal. Totalitarian regime or society won't let you be as long as you don't come outside your enclosure. They'll go inside. They'll go inside your home. They'll go inside your bathrooms. They'll go inside your schools and tell you what to do. Now, in regard to this proposed non-discrimination, non-choice thing, what is going on there? Who's coercing who? Who's bullying who? Who's making people do stuff they don't want to do? And who wants these people to be punished, not for physically attacking people, not for cheating people, but for having opinions that our woke elite are against? And the woke people get more woke every month. Something that's woke this year will be some reactionary thing next year, the way things are going. So this is the law of coercion. We're going to make you do stuff, and we're going to punish you. Now, if I'm a robber and I stick a gun, and I say, give me $20, that's a crime. But if I say, oh, you had an opinion I didn't like, you didn't associate the way I liked, I'm going to rob 100 times that from you, but it's okay, I'm the government, and I'm doing it to fight discrimination. So it's a good thing. Also, bigotry. The term bigotry is used a lot. Basically, it applies to opinions that you're not supposed to have. No respectable person has that opinion. It's bigotry. Well, bigotry, if you look at one of the definitions of it, is not what you believe. It's how you treat people who differ from you in your beliefs. Say, well, I disagree with them, but they can have their opinion, I'll have mine. That's mostly gone from this society. People are fired for having opinions that offend blacks or homosexuals or this or that, so-called victim groups. So that's why this law is bad, and this is why the people who support it are bad. Not politically, they're not nice, they're not bad because they want to be coercive. And we talked about America being the land of the free. We even had that in the Star Spangled Banner, the land of the free and the home of the brave. No, it's not anymore. And this is the reason why. Now, we've heard a little bit about, oh, am I over? Yes, oh. Do what? My time is up? Okay, then I have lots more to say, as I always do. Thank you very much for letting me go. I'm opposed to all this. I'm opposed to the victimization stuff. The biggest victims, you know who they are. Bye.
James Barfield.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And before I start, I would like to ask the timekeeper, if you would, please, don't start my time until I make a statement. And then okay. Well, let me just say this. I don't really know why I'm here, because for the last 4 months, we've been told that this group was the group that the city council wanted to hear from, and they wanted you to hear from us. Now we look in the paper today, and we find out that they've run an end round around you guys with the Kansas Leadership Conference. So they're the ones that are going to make the recommendation to the city as to how to proceed, not you guys. So why are we even here? I don't understand it. Okay, now, I want to say this to you right quick. We're not going to deal with opinions. We're going to deal with facts. You will hear that we've got state and federal laws. But what you don't hear is we also have over 200 cities that have NDOs. Over 200. There must be a need for it. Now, one of the things I don't want you to do is make the mistake that other cities or some other cities have made, and I'll give you one example. Charlotte, North Carolina, in 2015, refused to pass an NDO, and they paid for it dearly with the loss of jobs, the loss of companies that were going to relocate to Charlotte, and with the loss of city, state, and even NBA professional sports activities. In fact, they lost billions of dollars in revenue. So guess what they did? In January of this year, they gladly passed an NDO that is worded quite similarly to what we have here in Wichita. They learned their lesson. They learned it the hard way. Now, in January, they passed it, but guess what? In August the 10th, they expanded that NDA. Okay? So let's don't get confused here, ladies and gentlemen, by somebody that has never experienced discrimination telling you there's no need for it. Somebody that could stand here and tell you that we're all protected today. You take a minute and walk in my shoes and tell me that. Okay? It doesn't happen. So I'm urging you all, if you have any influence, when you make your recommendation, you make a recommendation to pass this NDO. It's long past time, and I doubt there's any city the size of Wichita anymore that does not have an NDA on the books already. And it's time to quit kicking the can down the road. Let's get serious about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barfield. If you wouldn't mind sharing that article with us.
Be happy to.
Thank you.
Who do I give it to?
I do not have anyone else listed. If anyone wishes to speak at this time, please come up and clearly state your name.
I'm Susan Henderson. I'm an individual citizen. I do not represent any particular group, although I do have a religious affiliation with respect and dignity. I also don't believe that I should be forced to accept a view of the human person that violates my beliefs or promotes violating my beliefs. There are Christians who have been involved in vandalism of LGBTQ churches, and I do not under any circumstances condone that or bullying or abuse of such persons. That being said, I think we all want an ordinance that's fair and respects the rights of all parties, both the LGBTQ community and those professing particular religious beliefs. Outlawing particular religious beliefs is itself discrimination. So I have concerns, especially about religious organizations who employ people as part of their mission, but those persons do not promote that particular religion. So say a Christian school cafeteria worker. I also have concerns that this ordinance does not address religious freedom when it comes to individual Christian business owners who may be forced to engage in activities that violate their beliefs. So, say I have a company that creates banners and I'm being asked to create a banner for, a pride parade or something. I could be accused of discrimination and brought before this ordinance. There are a lot of questions about this ordinance and how it will be applied, who will be doing the investigating of complaints. Will the council have a say in who's picked? Will the investigator have a background in investigating discrimination? And how will we be assured that the investigator will be neutral or that they might be politically inclined to find discrimination? How can we assure neutrality? That's something that the ordinance does not go into. It also doesn't say who in the law department who will make the probable cause determination. It doesn't say who will decide whether an application of the ordinance actually violates an individual's religious liberties under the federal constitution, state constitution, or Kansas's Preservation of Religious Freedom Act. The investigator doesn't decide that, so who decides? And how much of a burden must the ordinance create in order for it not to be applied in a particular case? Something else that's concerning is that will individual cases be made publicly available? Are the name of alleged violators going to be published? If so, alleged violations that aren't substantiated could destroy someone's reputation.
Excuse me, Susan, you're past your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you hearing me.
Hello, my name is Lori Dean, and the question I have is, from what I understand, is you're to give your advisement of how you think this should proceed. How is that done? So after you've listened and formed your opinion, what would be the next step of this committee? Am I allowed to ask questions?
I'm going to give you the answer.
Okay.
Yep. But I thought I would come here so everyone can hear. So after tonight's public forum, the advisory board will reconvene on September the 21st. They will have a robust conversation amongst the advisory board to talk about what they've heard. They will talk about what they have seen in their research and other conversations that have happened since this ordinance has been moved to the board for a recommendation. They will then form their recommendation at the meeting on September 21st. That information will then be presented to the mayor and city council for their conversation and vote and/or decision on how they want to move forward with the NDO on October the 12th.
So then on the 21st, I think what I heard is no one's allowed to talk, but are we allowed to be there and hear what they say?
Yes, so the meeting on September 21st is a public meeting. All of the advisory board meetings are public meetings. There will not be public comment. The conversation will stay with the board, and they will have a discussion, and you will be able to hear their conversation. You will be able to hear their recommendation live when it's happening, but there will not be an exchange of conversation between the board and community during that particular session.
Okay, I think my last question.
Yeah.
So from what I've understood and heard, that there's a lot of vagueness in the current discrimination order. Will there be a time where it'll be specifically, this is what the discrimination order is going to say? Will there be time for people to look at that before it's passed, or will it be, this is what it's going to be, and we're passing it tonight as well?
So I looked around to find the assistant city manager so that we can determine when the documents are released to the public. But the ordinance that will be presented to the council will be.
Good evening, everybody. Dante Martin, Assistant City Manager. If I understood your question, so we have a proposed NDO that the board and others have reviewed. And so next week, the board
Is
will.
this the one that was like in June 2nd, or the one that originally came out, or has it been changed since that one?
So I struggle with the dates because there's been multiple versions.
Okay.
But the
yeah.
version that was presented at the last
July 13th.
advisory board.
July 15th? 13th. And can you go online and find that specific, because I feel like I've seen several, and I'm not sure which one to look at as the last one.
So a couple, and you've asked a number of questions, so
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'll try to help. We can get you a copy of the current NDO that we're discussing, the NDO that the board has been reviewing, that KLC met around or had discussions about next week. Next week, the board will have the opportunity to deliberate around the many topics or many discussions that we've had over the last couple of months. KLC sessions, information that's been requested by the board and provided by staff. Using all of this information, they will be able to inform their recommendations in whatever form those recommendations take. To answer your question as to what will the council review, there is the July 15th, I think is the date that I was just told. That's the current NDO on the table. So the council will have that document along with any recommendations made by the board, any suggested changes made by the board. But understand, the document they're reviewing is the existing July 15th document that we've been discussing for the last couple of months.
Okay. Does
that help?
Yes, that does.
Okay.
That's all I had.
And just one correction, the date is July 13th.
Okay. And I can go online and find that.
If you go to the city council page and go to the agenda and minutes from July 13th, you will be able to find it under the city council documents. You're welcome. All right, I believe we have heard from all of the speakers tonight. Again, I want to thank the public for coming out and sharing their perspectives with the advisory board and participating in the conversation on this evening. I do want to open up the floor back to the board to see if there are any questions and or comments that we want to cover before we close out.
Yes, I had a couple things I wanted to address that I heard. The first one being, I heard a couple comments saying that when are we going to actually look at the document or discuss the document? I wanted to say I think it was important that this board, we have looked at the document. It was important that we fully understand what is in it so that we aren't confused, so that when we have that conversation about making a recommendation, we aren't confused, so that maybe we can clear up any confusions that you all have, so that when we prepare to make a recommendation, I just wanted to emphasize, we have looked at that document, especially last week when we had that facilitation, especially with those attorneys. I think that was an opportunity for us all to make those clear of those confusions, but I heard that tonight. We have looked at that document. It's definitely not that we aren't, but it is so important that we understand exactly what is in that, and that we have that information so that we aren't confused about what is in that document. Like, I heard so much tonight that you guys are confused about. So I wanted to address that. And then the second thing I wanted to address was I heard a couple people say they thought that the Kansas Leadership Center would be making a recommendation instead of us. I thought I heard maybe that tonight. I did want to say that unless that has changed, we will be making the recommendation still. I did hear some frustrations about the facilitation, about how that was handled, or maybe it felt like the city was taking that process over from us. I hear you. And if you want to email us and make comments about that, you're more than welcome to. Again, I hear you on the frustrations on that, and it was out of our hands. And we will be making that recommendation, not the Kansas Leadership Center. So just wanted to ease any concerns about that in particular, but I hear you on that, so.
I was wondering if maybe you can explain what that entailed, because just to let everybody know, we did participate and that they will be providing a report to us, which will then be included in our report.
The Kansas Leadership Experience?
Yes.
Sure. So the city engaged the Kansas Leadership Center to bring together different factions in the community to have a conversation around the NDO. Part of that conversation was to, one, explain the differences between what was being proposed by the city and what was in state and federal laws, so that we could identify any gaps between the three laws, that we would have understanding at a local level of what that meant. That was day one. Day two was a facilitated conversation with the different factions that were in the room. The goal was to try to identify if there were spaces within the ordinance that everyone had shared understanding around. It was also an opportunity for the different factions to hear perspectives from one another, to ask questions, and to engage in a conversation that would allow them to hear the perspective of someone else in the room, as well as for the Kansas leadership to develop a report to try to synthesize what happened in the space, what thoughts or perspectives came out of that would be beneficial for the advisory board to have as they are making their decision. The advisory board was a part of the conversation last week. There were members that were in the room participating in the activity, as well as there were members that were online that also had an opportunity to hear and participate in the conversation along the way. The Kansas Leadership Center will be providing a report to the city of Wichita to really codify what happened in the meeting, the voices that they heard. That information will be used to help influence the conversations that happen in this particular space, as well as it will be presented to the mayor and council as another opportunity to look at the other perspectives that have come from the community, so that as much as we can hear as many perspectives, as many factions, as many voices around what is in the NDO, that was another opportunity that they chose to take to bring that conversation into another space. So that does not that does not impede or supersede that the mayor and council have asked the advisory board to provide a recommendation. That is still the ask, regardless of the facilitated sessions that happen with the Kansas Leadership Center.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, with the KLC report, I don't know what to call it, I'm just calling it a report. Will that be accompanied by recommendations from KLC, or will it just simply be a compilation of data?
I'm going to look to Dante.
I'm not sure you should be sitting way in the back.
Thank you, and I think I understood your question. KLC wasn't asked to make recommendations as to the NDO. KLC was asked to facilitate a two-day session and provide a report documenting what took place during those 2 days.
Okay. My next question was, will the city attorney be present for the September 21st meeting so that if we have questions, we can ask?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And one thing I may add, and you didn't ask this question, but I want to make sure that it goes on the record. KLC has provided a list of unanswered questions that came out of those two-day sessions.
Okay.
I know that you were there, Tabitha. There are a number of questions that were asked of Folston, the attorneys that were there, as well as KLC staff, and they weren't prepared to answer that evening. KLC has provided that list of questions. City staff will start to dig into them, get answers to the questions. That information will be shared in advance of your meeting next week. And yes, the city attorney will be here next week.
Okay, next question. I'm sorry, I have a list. I've been writing them down throughout the evening. When will we see the report from KLC? And you said we will get, I apologize, my allergies are not my friend today. When will we have, you mentioned we would see those questions prior to the 21st, those unanswered questions. My question at that point is how soon?
As soon as possible. So I met yesterday afternoon with representatives of PPMC and KLC to talk about the timeline for the questions and the report. KLC sent the questions just this evening, and so I forwarded them on to our city attorney to get answers. And I could share them with LaShonda if you're interested in seeing the list of questions and making sure that everything was captured. I know many of you were in the room. As far as the report, KLC has given us a timeline, a rough timeline that they hope to complete the report this week, early next week. Once again, we impressed upon KLC the importance of getting the report in your hands in advance of the meeting so that you can read it, digest it, ask questions related to it. So I can't answer your question with a firm date as to when you'll receive it, but we'll continue to impress upon KLC that we get it to you all as soon as we can.
Okay, and final question, this may be a LaShonda question. Is there a way, and still complying with the Open Meetings Act, for members of this board to submit the areas that we have concerns and we would like to discuss ahead of time so that we are not coming in cold turkey, so that we can prepare, each of us can look specifically at those areas and make sure that we're well-versed in them? I mean, I have the ordinance right here with me. It's with me every single meeting I've been to. I have notes all over it. I'm very familiar with its content, but that doesn't mean that if somebody brings up a question, I would like to have studied it ahead of time. And if there's a way that we could do that and know those areas of concerns that our fellow board members have before the meeting without violating any Open Meetings Act, so that we could be as prepared as possible and use our time wisely, I would sincerely appreciate that.
Okay. I don't know if you know that answer directly.
If I understand your question, I think the cleanest way, if you have questions, if there's areas that need additional information, more clarity, if you would forward those questions individually to LaShonda, and then LaShonda can forward them on to staff, and we can get answers in advance of the meeting and have the city attorney and city staff prepared to speak to those questions during the meeting. There's a risk of running afoul of the Open Meeting Act if we start to have serial conversations. And so we shouldn't conduct board meetings online via email through serial communication, but if individually you reach out to LaShonda, share your concern, she'll forward it on to staff, and we'll get answers.
Then just for the public to be aware, then we would then make sure that each of those concerns were brought up in that meeting and discussed in an open meeting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So as long as you are, I misunderstood the question. I thought you were wanting us to share it back with the board. So collectively, you would see all of the questions and can study on your own and not
Right.
necessarily get the city to respond to questions.
Well, if it's something that would require a city to respond to the questions, yes. But I would just like to be able to know coming into it what areas we're going to be discussing, where, and certainly the open-ended questions from the KLC facilitated meetings will be helpful. But I think it's important that we have some time, especially if we're going to, and I believe we have to, time-wise, make our recommendation on the 21st. We need to come in as prepared as possible.
Okay. Okay. You're welcome. Other questions or thoughts?
LaShonda, I have a question.
I have a quick question. Oh, I'm
Go ahead,
sorry. I
Kelly.
can't tell if somebody's trying to
Go ahead,
talk
Kelly.
down there. So-
No, Kelly, you are up.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to talk over whoever I was talking over. So I had a question. We were kind of things that we heard tonight, kind of, addressing those things. And one thing that I heard was several people concerned about assault or sexual assault or anything like that in bathrooms or in public spaces being a concern. I want to make sure that I'm very clear. Do we have laws on the books in Wichita, Kansas for sexual assault and assault, if that were ever to be a concern of anybody doing it?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure those areas were covered for us and we didn't need to worry about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gates.
LaShonda, can you tell me how the recommendation is going to look being given? Or obviously there's this written report, there's a piece that's written from the Leadership Center. Then as a group, are we individually getting an opportunity to address the city council and the mayor on our particular vote or what we believe should be done with the NDO? Or is it something different than that? Because I want to make sure that I'm prepared in my mind how that.
So your recommendation is pretty broad, and you have the liberty to interpret what you want to send forward. So if the collective wants to send forward a yay or nay for the NDO, and that is what the collective want, that is one way the recommendation could be presented. If there is a lot of differences amongst the advisory board and you would like to provide recommendations based off of your individual responses, that is also an option that you can consider as well. There is nothing in the request that came from the mayor and council that says that this advisory board has to come back with a consensus on what they are wanting the council to review and or consider as they are making the final decision on the NDO.
Thank you.
I think, not to muddy the waters, but we do have some time this evening that we thought we were still going to be listening to public comment. So while we're here, I would like to see if we could come, those of us who are here, to kind of a consensus of how we would actually like to do it. Do we want to present a report and say, here are the areas that we see as divisive and here are options? Do we want to actually have the board say, we recommend XYZ? I mean, I think it would be good to have those discussions now so that coming into the 21st, we know what we're doing, and we are going to have a lot to discuss on the 21st. And if we can have kind of our desired framework already determined before the 21st, I think that will help us be much more productive on the 21st. So I just wanted to throw that out there and see what y'all think.
This is Shala
I
Perez.
like the idea. Oh, sorry, Shala. Go ahead.
I would add that if we each have something that we would like included in the report, that we could prepare something in advance, and that way we can kind of discuss that as a group when we get here and already have a product that we would like to submit individually and see if that kind of moved things along a little.
So I think that speaks to Tabitha's ask earlier in relationship to having all of the advisory board members individually email me with whatever questions or concerns that you have about the NDO so that we can get a comprehensive list of things that we need to discuss on the 21st. And if there are questions that need to be answered by city staff, that gives us an opportunity to go back and get those answers before we get here on the 21st. So we would then collect all of the information individually from each of you and then send out a document before the 21st so that you have an opportunity to see where your colleagues are in relationship to their thoughts about the NDO. And so when you got here on the 21st, it would not be the first time that you're seeing the conversation or the language, but it would be working through whether or not you can come to consensus on what to keep, what to dismiss, and or your recommendation to leave it as it is, your recommendation to do nothing, to not pass the NDO. It's broad in the sense of what you have the ability to take action on. But to Tabitha's point, if everyone sends me their questions or concerns ahead of the 21st, we can compile a comprehensive list that will give you a couple days to digest before you came to the bench on the 21st.
Tabitha, are you suggesting that we have, let's say there's a portion of us that don't agree, that say it shouldn't exist at all. So how would you then craft a document, or would it be easier for us to just have a stenographer or someone memorialize the comments that each board member makes at the end, concluding whether they suggest that we should pass or should not pass, and then the city council and the mayor can do what they want to do with the content from there?
Okay, so kind of in my head, and this is in my head, okay, speaking it out loud kind of for the first time here. Okay. So I would, for me, if I was doing it, I would kind of take it section by section, go through it, have our comments about each section, for and against, and just say there are 3 people for this, whatever it is. And so that the council and the mayor and the public has a full understanding, because it is very important that if we're not in agreement, that everyone knows that. That is part of what this process is supposed to be, in my mind, is that I would doubt that we're going to be unified in every section and every word and every segment of this NDO. So I would say that there are going to be parts of it that we can probably just agree on and move on and say we have no problems. But my recommendation would be to break it down and go through every section and say, okay, yep, we're all good, move on. This one we need to discuss, and we can gather that from the input we've all given. And I would recommend, if we have an issue with a part or we have a question, that we cite exactly what page, what paragraph, where it is, so that when we're all researching it, we're not reading through it, trying to find it. Tell us where your issue is so that we can be deliberate in our process. I guess for me, I would just like it to be more organized. I think we'll have a much better final product. There will be less ambiguity. People will understand what we were trying to say. But my desire would be that we have both sides. If we didn't come to agreement, we would have that section. Here's the wording. Here's both sides. The majority recommends this, or we could not come to a consensus. Here you go. Because quite frankly, we're volunteers. We're not being paid to do this. So we are being asked to give them our recommendations. And I believe firmly that the recommendations should encompass the entire board, not just the majority.
So for each section too, so if we go this route, should we, in each section, say there's someone that wants to also add stuff? Because I'm sure we're going to come up with that too. Should we also just in each section
as that section's being discussed?
Okay, so, okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I just was thinking about if people were still curious about certain parts of it that hadn't completely landed on it, and it might be in the moment I'm making a decision of the day of or whatever, to really get an opportunity to kind of then, as I would foresee it as being, as each of us would get an opportunity to stand at the lectern or wherever and address the board. And then if you wanted to go down the NDO yourself and say, here's the areas that I have problems with, and this is what I'm suggesting, then as an individual, you can do that. But then allowing other people to give their opinion or their perspective on the NDO without necessarily having to commit to a particular, let's get all of our information together. If you wanted to go line by line and paragraph by paragraph, that would be okay. But for someone who didn't want to do that, and maybe just broadly want to say, I don't agree with it at all, and then to have that opinion also, space for that.
Yeah, I think
I'm saying.
that's very easy to do, very easy to capture. And whether we want to just each of us sit down and go through it verbally, I don't care. I would just like to make sure we have the structure in place and we know what we're doing coming in, so that we know what to expect and we know how to prepare our own comments, because in absence of a chair, we tend to do a lot of just back and forth and no function moving forward. I would like us to have the plan moving forward prior to the meeting. And that doesn't mean that that plan can't be changed at the meeting. That's no problem with that. And
That's why I was recommending that. I don't know how the meeting notes are normally memorialized as far as verbiage or the comments that might be made by any particular board member or city council member on this particular issue. That's why I suggested a stenographer to maybe memorialize the comments, so that we might be able to then individually have 5 minutes or whatever the time frame would be, 10 minutes, to address the city council, the mayor, on a particular issue, and not have to come up with some holistic plan as a board. But we know we had this much time to address the board on the issue from what we've heard, and we then can use whatever creativity or however it is we want to use it in that way.
This is Shala Perez. Just to clarify, it's my understanding that we are going to, as a body, have the discussion and then produce a report that will be sent over, that on the 21st, the city council will not be present to speak directly to, but we will be actually condensing our thoughts and producing a report that will be forwarded on. And so I don't know if, following the discussion, we need to develop maybe some type of subcommittee to actually produce everything and work on everything, and then float that back to you to disseminate back for everybody to kind of sign off on. Or
I don't think we can vote via email without going sideways of COMA laws. But
we will have to have probably, then would we need to work on that report in advance of that meeting? How do we reduce that down and then send it back out and make sure everybody is okay with the final product before sending it on?
So if we follow the original logic of everyone sending their thoughts, whether that is by section, a general thought about the ordinance, so that you have an opportunity to review that before we got here, we would hash out what stays and what doesn't stay in the meeting. And then we would finalize the document or report or whatever you want to call it, to say, based off of the conversation with the advisory board, these are their recommendations. You would hash that out in this particular conversation, and we would draft that based off of your feedback. It doesn't have to be technical. It doesn't have to be. We just need to respond to what's in the particular document. So if you sent that ahead of time, the meeting would be about hashing out the differences that came out of what you sent to us in advance.
Shonda, Will Polite. So just for clarification's sake, so our recommendation can be to change the NDO or make additions or subtractions from the actual NDO?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
I was a little confused there. I thought.
So your recommendation could be leave the NDO just as you sent it to me. Your recommendation could be don't pass the NDO at all. Your recommendation could be pass the NDO, but we want to see these changes that we've outlined in this particular document. So it can come in a multitude of forms. So you can give recommendations to delete, to add, to change words, to adjust, or you can give recommendations to leave it as it is or to do nothing at all.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Gates.
So when on the 21st, who's going to be in the room?
You.
And that's it?
And if the public shows up, the public will be here.
Okay. I was under the understanding that it was going to be a meeting where the city council was going to be here as well, so that we can then give our recommendation to them face to face.
No.
So it's all written.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, that does not preclude you from going to the October 12th meeting at all. If the advisory board made a decision that they want to be present at the October 12th meeting to present their recommendation, by all means, you have the ability to do that. Typically, what happens in the process is that a recommendation that comes from the advisory board is then carried by staff as the recommendation from that particular advisory board and presented to the elected body, and then they take care of their business on that particular item. But it does not preclude you from being present at the meeting on October 12th if you decide as a board that you want to be present and share your recommendation. Or showing up as an individual and providing perspective.
Okay, I was under the impression that they were going to be here, so thank you.
LaShonda, so, what I hear you saying is that we can make these recommendations and they're going to be broad recommendations. And my assumption is that we are going to have probably, sorry about that. We are probably going to have a situation of, approve or not approve with a list of reasons why or changes to make. And you're saying that we're going to send in our concerns ahead of time. I feel concerned about opening up, going line by line by line through the NDO as number one, being extremely tedious and time consuming. And number two, not really what I understand we are doing, to change words in there, but to rather give a bigger recommendation. So if we send our stuff into you and you get it back to us in a collective form, like this is what we'll be talking about, it almost feels like we need to have somebody who maybe is in charge at the meeting to keep us moving through the recommendations. Would you take on that role? Would you be facilitating that process? Or is it just going to be a kind of a free-for-all conversation?
So technically, I would serve in that role unless there is someone who wants to serve in the role from the board. And by all means, that is a decision the board can make. But I serve as a facilitator to ensure that we get to the end goal of making a recommendation or providing a recommendation back to the mayor and council regarding the NDO. And so while if you are sending in your concerns or questions ahead of time and we form that, that may eliminate us going through the full document because there might not be questions on every section of the actual NDO. So if we can gain clarity by the list you send prior to the meeting and we come up with a comprehensive list, we may be able to move past some of those sections that you do not have issue or concern with by just acknowledging that there were no questions raised on section 1A or whatever however the sections are broken up. And we would only focus in that meeting on what has been provided to us unless there was something else brought up in the meeting that an advisory board member wanted to raise as a concern.
Okay, thank you. My other question is there an opportunity or a possibility that we could go to the October 5th meeting with our recommendations so that the city council has that the week before the day of their vote? Is that a possibility?
I'm looking at Dante because I don't know that answer.
Good evening, Kelly. I want to make sure I understand your question. You said go to the city council October 5th. Are you saying physically attend the council meeting or present the recommendations? What are you suggesting October 5th?
I'm suggesting that we present the recommendations. I mean, they gave us a lot of trust and, basically said, we value what you say and we will provide something written, but I didn't know if a couple of representatives from the board or something could go present our recommendations so that they were clear.
Okay. Something that I would need to follow up with city manager and the mayor. So we haven't gone as far as establishing the October 5th agenda. I could take forward your question, your thought, your recommendation, and see if the mayor, the council, and the manager are willing to place a formal agenda item October 5th for a formal presentation of the recommendation. And I could get that answered to you by next Tuesday, by our meeting next week.
Okay, thank you. That would be great.
Dante, I'd also like to add what Kelly's saying, because it seems this is what it appears. It might not be that way. So we wrestle with this. We come up with our suggestions, but then it's behind closed doors that our suggestions are then offered to the city council. And then there's this piece that I'd like for the public to know exactly what we say to the city council, so that then the city council members can then be accountable to whatever it is that we said, to then what might happen next. I'm not saying that the information that we would have put down in writing would not have been delivered to them and they wouldn't have been able to share that or been shared publicly. But I would have just liked the idea of them being able to see and hear, and to also the public to be able to see and hear, this is what we said about the NDO, and then now whatever they do with that information is then solely on them and their shoulders for what happens next.
So, and thank you, Pastor Gates, for that clarification. So with that being said, and I realize we're not taking a formal vote and we don't have consensus at this point, I think I can frame the question in that way, that the sentiment of the board, of certain members of the board, is a desire to present the recommendations formally to council in a public setting. Whether that be October 5th, Kelly, October 12th, we can provide written recommendations in advance of the meeting, but what I'm hearing is a desire by some members of the board to formally present those recommendations to the mayor and council. So I'll track that down.
Sorry, I think if we're gonna do that, then we need to, as a board, decide who is gonna do that. And basically put a facilitator out there from the board who's going to present it.
Okay, so let me track down the question with the mayor, council, and the manager, and then circle back with you next Tuesday, if that's okay.
I'm offering that it's not one individual, that they hear from the board members individually.
Yeah, I agree that somebody needs to go, like, we need to decide what that looks like or whatever. But I did want to ask if I could make a recommendation that we have someone chair next week's meeting. I've been involved in some of these things before, and it can be a very tedious and time-consuming process. And I think, having a facilitator is really great. But I think we need a lot of effort to stay on track with as much information as we've been given over the last several weeks. So I don't know if that is appropriate to make a recommendation this evening.
Yeah, it's appropriate to make a recommendation.
Yeah,
Okay.
if that's, I would be willing to do that if people would like me to.
If there's a motion, I'll second that, Kelly.
Okay. Yes, I do make a motion, and I guess Tabitha has volunteered, so I'll make that motion.
And I will second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
All right, motion carries.
I have an additional question. I just want to make sure that I'm getting this right. On the 21st, we're supposed to be prepared to have a recommendation completed, not questions asked. Is that correct?
No, it will be a full discussion.
Okay. I just thought that day was like, oh, you have to have your recommendation done, completed. It's the turn-in due date, not, oh, let's have conversation around the recommendation.
Well, it has to be conversation around the recommendation, because as a group, you guys haven't had a full conversation to know where you each stand. So the 21st has to be both conversation and coming up with a recommendation that you'd like to move forward. So it has to be a combination of both in that discussion.
Thank you.
I wanted to respond to something earlier before the motion was made, in response to what we were talking about, sending a facilitator to a meeting. I was on the original board when it was, I don't know, kind of a draft board, and we sent a pretty large group, and even if anyone, like, not everyone spoke, we just kind of had a large showing, and we kind of had subcommittees where it was like community engagement, equity, and that was kind of the original vision and layout for the board. So I think that we don't need to send just one person. If we can have a large showing, but maybe we can nominate a spokesperson, that would be great. But I think it can be a lot like tonight. We had an initial conversation of, a couple people show up for the public comment, but as many people showed up, and then look, we had a large showing. So I don't think we necessarily need to pick a facilitator, but if, we do go forward and we do make a formal presentation, I think that it should be open to every member of the board. And if we have, then we can have a conversation of who speaks or delegate those tasks to everyone. But when we did have a draft board, that was kind of how we did it, of, you know, strengthen numbers. And so just wanted to put that out there, that it was kind of cool that we got to all present that way. So I wanted to throw that out there.
And I think once we get a final decision back from the manager and mayor on a official presentation, we can have that dialogue at the meeting on the 21st on who should be prepared to present on behalf of the advisory board. Other questions, comments, feedback?
I just wanted to thank the members of the public for coming out and interacting with us and giving us your opinions and providing information for us to consider. Obviously, that's very important, and this process has been, I know some people feel like it's been slowed down. Some of us feel like we're kind of in a rush here. So I appreciate people taking time to come speak to us.
Any other thoughts or questions? One last question for the board. Is there any other piece of information you need? I know I have sent out several emails this week trying to get you as much information as possible, so I apologize for the flood. But I want to make sure that you have all that you need as you go into this discussion on next week. If there is any other piece of information that you think is important as you are working through your thoughts and working through things that you would like to bring forward, please let me know so that we can get you that information as quickly as possible. We will send you the KLC questions, just the questions without any responses tomorrow, so that you kind of know what some of the lingering questions were from that particular session. And then when we have a full document with the feedback from the city attorney, we will provide you with an updated document at that time. All right, if there are no other thoughts or questions, I will entertain a motion for us to adjourn.
I will make that motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, again, thank you so much for your commitment to the work, and we will see you guys next week.